Welcome to my Primary Maths and Sats Help videos. This video explains what fractions are and how to read them. So what is a fraction? Well, if we take this example, we have one whole cake here. Well, we don't necessarily have to eat the whole cake. We could eat part of it. So if we were to cut it into 4 equal pieces and eat one of those pieces, we would be eating 1/4 of it. Or we could eat half of it. If we take another example, here we have a £1 coin, which is the same as 100 pence. Well, we don't necessarily have to spend the whole coin. We could spend part of it. We're not actually going to cut it into quarters, into 4 pieces, but we might want to spend 1/4 of it, in which case we would be spending 25 pence, because 25 is the quarter of 100 pence. Or we might want to spend half of the pound. Again, we're not going to cut it in half, but we could spend 50 pence, because 50 pence is the same as half of 100 pence. And the last example, we might have a plank of wood. This one is 1 metre long, so it's one whole plank of wood. Well, we might not need to use the whole piece. We might just want to use 1/4 of it, in which case we would be using 25 centimetres. Or we might need to use just half of it, and that would be the same as 50 centimetres. So basically, a fraction is part of one whole thing. And here are some more examples in real life where we use fractions. So we see half price sale signs up in shop windows. Here's a pizza cut up into 8 equal pieces. Each of those pieces is 1/8. And here's a recipe where we are asked, for example, to use half a teaspoon of baking powder and 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. So let's look at the actual fraction names. We've already mentioned some. So this one represents 1 or a half, and it has a 2 at the bottom. This one would be 1 or a third with a 3 at the bottom. So this one again has a 3 at the bottom. We would call this 2/3. This one we've already seen is 1 or a quarter. It has a 4 at the bottom. So then this one is 3/4. This one is 1 or a fifth with a 5 at the bottom. So this is 4/5. This is 1 or a sixth with a 6 at the bottom. So we'd call this one 5/6. So there's a couple of things to notice when we're looking at fractions, that they're named after the bottom number. Now the 3 that are quite tricky are the first 3, where you've got half, third and quarter. After that though, they follow a pattern. So if it's 5 at the bottom, it's fifths, 6 at the bottom, sixths, 7 at the bottom, sevenths, 8 at the bottom, eighths, and so on. And the other thing to notice is that we read the top number first and then the bottom one. So why do fractions have 2 numbers? Here's an example. This one says 3/4. Well, the bottom number, here the 4, is known as the denominator. If we take this bar of chocolate as an example, we can see that there are 4 pieces in total. So that is what the denominator always shows. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. It shows how many pieces there are all together, and it's vital that we remember this. Now the top number, here the 3, is known as the numerator. So if we were to eat 3 of those 4 pieces of chocolate, that's what the numerator here represents. In other words, how many pieces out of the total we're focusing on, in this case, eating. Now let's look at how we should read fractions. And again, we've already touched on this, but there are actually 3 different ways to read any fraction. And it's really important that we remember this, because it depends how we're using them, which way we should read them. So if we take our chocolate example again, where we've eaten 3 pieces and there were 4 to begin with, we would record this as 3 as the numerator and 4 as the denominator. And we could read this fraction as 3/4. So we've eaten 3/4 of the bar. Or we could say that we've eaten 3 out of 4 pieces. And the third way to read this fraction is 3 divided by 4. So just to explain the last one, 3/4 with a 3 at the top and a 4 at the bottom could also be written as 3/4, mean exactly the same thing. And if we look at that slash symbol, that is actually the symbol that means divide in maths, and you can see it there on the calculator. So 3 divided by 4, if we were to use a calculator, would give us an answer of 0.75. So 0.75 is exactly the same as 3/4. And I'll deal with this more on another video, which will look at the link between fractions, decimals and percentages. Another really important thing that we need to recognise when we're working with fractions are which fractions represent one whole thing. So if we look at our bar of chocolate again here, we know that this represents 3/4. 3 out of 4 pieces have been eaten, or 3/4. So if we were to eat that whole bar of chocolate, we would be eating 4 out of 4 pieces, or 4 of the quarters, and we would write this as 4/4. So basically 4/4, 4/4 means the whole thing, one whole thing, in this case a bar of chocolate. Some more examples. Here we've got a pizza, and I've ticked the ones that are being eaten, so that's 5 out of 6 pieces have been eaten, which is the same as 5/6. Well, if we were to eat that whole pizza, we would need to eat 6 out of 6 pieces, or 6/6, which looks like that, 6/6. So that fraction represents the one whole pizza in this case. So hopefully you've noticed the pattern here. Here's some more examples. If we've got 12/12, that's the same as 12 out of 12 parts or pieces, which is the same as the whole thing. 25/25. 25 out of 25 parts, same as the whole thing. 43/43, again, it represents the same as one whole thing, whatever that is. So basically, if the numerator and the denominator are the same, the fraction represents the or one whole thing. So that really just leaves one more thing to mention about fractions, and it's something you may already have noticed, but fractions always represent amounts of equal size. So if we look at our cake example, you can see that we've split this cake up into 4 portions, and that's what the 4 at the bottom of the fraction, the denominator, represents, but also that each of these portions is identical in size. Therefore, they all represent quarters of the cake. We could take the same cake and split it up into 4 pieces again, but this time you can see that each of those pieces is very different in size, and therefore they do not represent quarters. And then if we look at our pound coin example again, this time we want to split the pound into half, and you can see from the denominator that that means into 2 amounts. Well, we can split a pound into 2 amounts in different ways. For example, we could split it up into an amount of 25 pence and 75 pence. But those do not represent half because they are different amounts. The only way to split a pound into halves is to split it up into 2 lots of 50 pence, each one of those representing 1/2. And you can see that they are equal amounts. So I do hope that this has been useful for you, and please do look at my other videos on how to use fractions in maths, and thank you for watching.